Welcome to the Design Vault, a show about the past, present, and future of design. The Design Vault is a conversation hosted by Shum and Thamer Abanami, reflecting on iconic products and ideas from the past and rethinking them from new perspectives.
Hey Albert, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm pumped for this episode. We're finally going to talk about the Roland TR-808 drum machine.
Yeah, that was a classic.
Yeah, it was a classic, and the more you kind of get into the story, the more some unexpected things pop up. So there are these questions like, what is a drum machine? Why was it useful? Why is it still useful?
And also,
how could something...
I think the impact on culture and music, it's one of those products I think that it was so distinctive and it made its mark in culture that at least I found really interesting when I kind of looked into it.
Yeah, it has this kind of massive outsized cultural impact while also being a commercial failure, which I think is really fascinating, that story of how can something fail on the outset but then become a success in a different dimension.
Yeah. So what was the origin? Can you share more about the background?
Yeah, let's go back to year 13th century, maybe year 1200 something.
Yeah.
There's this guy, no, seriously. I think the concept of automating rhythms has been with humans for a long time. And there's this engineer from the Middle East, from Anatolia, named El-Jazari. And he was kind of the father of robotics, they call him. He did automatons.
Yeah, automatons. That's
so
like
he
the
made
mechanical
these kind of
that whole era.
Mechanical objects that were humanoid that could do things like play music. And so he had an automaton that played drums, played drum sounds, or at least percussive sounds. But then you kind of fast forward through the centuries and you get into many examples of machines that were created to do rhythm. But you get into the late 70s and the early 80s, and you get into this moment where they become programmable, meaning before the 808 and the Lin LM1, which kind of came out around the same time, these things were, they would come as part of an organ.
Right.
And they would play like a salsa or a waltz that was pre-canned that you couldn't do anything except change the volume of. Because back in those days,
sure,
it was about organs, right? That was the thing that was in the house because the piano was too big or expensive.
Well, it's also like, and correct me if I'm wrong, this era of like the invention of a transistor and then electronics, like the idea of like going from analog to able to synthesize sound. Like I feel like that was like that. There's this big explosion of like new ways to create music, and in some ways it was would it be like almost like a new medium or a new sound?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think what you're talking about is this era of synthesis where you had these in the 70s. Some of it really started in the late 60s. A lot of this started, and then you started seeing 70s artists experiment with synthesis and synthesizers. And there was a moment where there was a decision made in the design of this 808 that it would synthesize the drum sounds. At the time, the competitor from Roger Lin, which is the Lin LM1, it played recordings of drum sounds. AKA samples, right? So essentially,
it's almost like a recording a sampling. It's like just like we can record that sound and then try to play it back, right?
Yeah, let me tell you a quick story about the LM1 so we can look at the 808 in context. There's a story that goes like this. Classic percussive sound is a clap or a group of people clapping. And the LM1 actually has a group of musicians clapping in unison as the hand clap. Now, I'll do you one better. The story goes that Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers were in the same studio as Roger Lin. And he said, hey, can you all just step in? We just want you to record a clap. And so that's the hand clap that's on the Lin LM1. And the LM1 is a drum machine that also has its legacy. Prince used it. John Mellencamp used it and Jack and Diane. So there's a lot of stuff. It was a commercial success, but it was also super expensive. So now the 808, because it was expensive, had to have memory, right, to play these recordings of drum samples. The twist with the 808 is they wanted to use synthesis. So using analog circuitry and transistors that were out of spec, they could generate via oscillators some kind of wave, a sine wave or whatever, and apply filters to it. And then mess with some variables like decay and attack, and then you get a sound. A sound like a kick drum, a sound like a clap, a sound like cymbals that are closed,
literally
or hi-hats are closed.
Generated sound, right? Synthesized.
They are generated, yes. Now, the problem with that, the advantage is you can basically sell an 808 brand new for a quarter or less of what the LM1 was.
Yeah,
was
less
selling.
parts, less memory, less things to like.
Yeah, something like, I don't know, $1,200 versus $5,000, something like that. Now, the kind of value prop, because Roland, probably knew that these sounds weren't going to be realistic. The value prop was, hey, you're an artist and you want to record a demo. And if you want to record a demo and you don't want to rent expensive studio space for this demo, get a drummer, a session drummer, but also miking drums back in those days was a really laborious, expensive thing to get those mic'd up. Hey, you can just program some drums and kind of give me the basic concept behind the sound of the song, what it is, and that's a demo. So it was it was hobbyists and musicians was the target.
Right.
And the goal was, hey, you want to record a demo?
So making it more affordable, more accessible, more broader audience, right?
Yeah, reduce the friction, right? But initial reviews were bad.
Why was it bad? Just
people, it didn't sound like anything that was drum-like. It sounded weird.
Oh, so it's because it was synthesized. It was
synthesized. It didn't sound like drums of the time, right? Whereas the LM1 was using, recorded.
So it didn't sound
sounds.
real, I guess, unrealistic, right?
Yeah, it didn't sound realistic. And we'll play some sounds a little later, but it didn't sound realistic. And so two things happened. One, they only made 12,000 and the production run was 2 years only. And people began to unload these because they were like, this is crap. And you could find them in pawn shops for $100.
So it was a failure.
Right.
It's
and
a commercial
on
failure.
Fire sale. Yeah, commercial failure. But a little thing happens where one person's trash is another person's treasure. A lot of people picked this up and created some new sounds with it. There's a band called Yellow Magic Orchestra, which I know you're a fan of.
Yeah, Ryuichi Sakamoto.
And they didn't sound like anything at the time. It was just space jazz, weird stuff, but it was cool. And it turns out that Roland had given them a prototype before they released it, so they got to mess around with it. Another band that got a prototype was Kraftwerk. Kraftwerk did not release anything with it until 6 years after it was released, but definitely they're an example of how Roland was courting the artists that they thought might have some interesting uses for it. But then Afrika Bambaataa and the birth of hip-hop, you see that drum machine feature heavily as a primary drum machine for hip-hop in the early 80s. Detroit techno and electro featured the 808 heavily. And then pop music, right? So you see Michael Jackson using the 808. You see New Kids on the Block using 808. You see Whitney Houston using the 808.
So it started being adopted by musical artists after actually the commercial kind of run.
Yeah, after the unknowns pick it up and create a signature sound that was hot, a new sound. It became established, became part of the canon of music what was cutting edge at the time. So bigger artists picked it up. And it's lasted all the way to today with Jamie XX, for example, is a famous musician. You have Missy Elliott. You have Taylor Swift. All over the place. It's used, right, still today. Now, there's only 12,000 made, probably 5,000 still functioning. People don't use the actual machine anymore. They use samples recorded from the machine, or they use one of the many Roland boxes that came afterwards that actually give you the option to generate 808 sounds.
So the sound of 808, it's still used today.
Yeah. The two drum machines that probably the easiest ones, that the closest ones, would be the TR-8S, which is a little bit fancier. But if you want the closest thing that comes to an 808 from how you program it and how it sounds, it would be the TR-8S. And I probably should tell you how kind of you would make sounds on this thing, because it was different, right? Which brings us to the sonic icon, the visual icon and how it's programmed, and then we can talk about the sonic icon if that works. So you basically have a giant knob where you can pick the instrument. You can pick bass drum, snare, clap, whatever hi-hat or cymbal you want. And once you pick it, you have 16 buttons. These are 16 notes, essentially, laid out in a row. 4 are red, 4 are orange, 4 are yellow, and 4 are white. And they can be, if you want them to be 4 bars or 4 beats, depending. And then you just program. Let's say you select bass drum. You put your bass drums where you want them, and you'll hear them playing. Then you switch to snare, and then you put the snares where you want them, and you'll hear the snares go over
So
the kick or the bass that's playing.
Basically programming to the beat, I guess.
Yeah, you're building it as you go, and you can hear it as you build it.
And then I guess then you could also create sequences. I guess that's the next step.
Yeah, you can create patterns, right? And you can kind of change between patterns. You can have a breakdown pattern, a build-up pattern, and that's kind of how you would either record with it or play it. Live. You can switch patterns, or also with your recording, you can switch things. Now, they were so easy to program. A lot of musicians basically depended on them instead of drummers. And I'll give you 2 examples. First example is Phil Collins used an 808. He also used its precursor, the CR-78. And he was a drummer. He was a drummer, and he wanted that sound. But he also, I think, understood that drummers have a feature, which is they'll want to kind of add the embellishments and maybe overdo it. And he was the first to say, hey, drummers will just go and do all these crazy fills when you sometimes just want something stripped down, right? And so I appreciate that he was a drummer and he used it, one of the early users of Roland's drum machines. But the story I always like to talk about is Marvin Gaye. So Marvin Gaye, here's a vocalist who was massively successful in the United States, runs into some tax problems and goes to Belgium to sort some things out.
Why not?
And
Why not?
Yeah. I mean, hey, if I could go to Belgium, I would.
Good chocolate.
And he asks around for a studio that had an 808. And he finds one. And he asks for a producer who's, not overbearing and he could work with. And he finds a producer. And he basically told them that he would program his drums and to come back tomorrow. He comes back tomorrow, and he has basically Marvin Gaye programmed the beat for Sexual Healing himself. And it is an iconic beat. It's an iconic song.
Yeah.
And he didn't need to hire a drummer. He was able to just have the creative thought go from him to the drum machine to tape.
Yeah. It's ease of use, allow artists to create like in a pretty open way, right? Very, very freeing.
Yeah.
You don't have to learn how to play drums to create drum sounds and play the drums.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's cool about it. It's technically a kind of a synthesizer. Right. And if you know, Giorgio Moroder used to do kind of this Italian disco electronic stuff with synthesizers. He had a room full of giant refrigerator-looking things with plugs in them.
Cables
and he had an assistant who was an engineer.
I remember seeing those pictures of it was like a mad scientist laboratory.
Yeah, you need an assistant to just like program anything simple. And so you in the span of less than 10 years, you get to a point where a singer can program this box overnight and create a hit. So I think that was interesting.
Well, I do think maybe going back to creating this new sound, it was unintended consequences. Like, I think a lot of us product makers, we have this intention like, hey, we're going to create this perfect product. It's going to have this target audience as a clear value prop. But the any product, as we all know, people will use it depending on what they want it to, rather than what we designed for. And I think 808 is really a perfect example of that unintended consequence, and in a positive way. of creating this whole new sound that artists adapted to or create their own. So Thamer, we talked about the visual icons and how you program and sequence sound. Can you talk more about the audio icon? What made it so iconic, I guess?
Yeah, to me, when we, one of the things we do in this podcast is we break down the icon. And when we were doing our research on the 808, it truly does have a visual icon, but the sonic icon is much more interesting, and that's really what it's about. And so the sonic icon, the primary icon, actually, before I go there, let's talk about, these are synthesized. I'll play some of the simpler ones first. I'm going to play the clap. Here's the clap, and you'll recognize it when I play it. I'll do it again. Okay, yeah. So did not sound exactly like a hand clap. It's like a wave with some noise and filters on it.
But also it's distinctive, let's just say that, right?
For sure.
Really, the audio and kind of, back to what makes something iconic. Like when you hear it, it's like, oh, it has a signature sound.
Yeah. And you've heard it before. Right. Now that you know what it sounds like, you've probably heard 808 before. Okay. So, Albert, do you know what cowbells are?
From the Sound of Music? Sorry, no. Well, it's literally a bell that cows wear so that you know where the cows are. So,
yes, that's precisely what I think it is. I believe it to be that, but let me play this sound for you. Let me do it one more time. Now, does that sound like a cowbell to you?
I'm not a cowbell expert, but that it's not what I imagine a cowbell to be, I guess.
You're a connoisseur of many things. I don't think you're the cowbell connoisseur. However, you're right. It doesn't sound. It's kind of like if a cowbell is supposed to tell you, there's a cow coming. This might be a cow in a spaceship, and you're on your own spaceship, and the cow is approaching your sector, and this is the alert you get. I don't know, but it's very different and very weird, but it's very iconic, right? It's very much the sound of early hip hop and a lot of electronic music. The snare is really crisp and interesting. It has a snap to it, and I'll play that. Here's the snare. One more time. But the reason the 808 took off and the thing that made it special sonically was the bass drum or the kick. Mm. So the kick drum on the 808 is very special, and it was a programming accident. When they programmed it, the decay was left on pretty long, and it created a sound like this. Let's do it one more time. And so this was the drum machine that blew people's speakers. You could feel it in your chest.
I don't know how to describe it. It's like that faux...
a boom.
Yeah,
it's
boom.
The boom.
Like this,
they call it the boom. Egyptian Lover was one of the early West Coast innovators in the 808, and he has a famous song, My Beat Goes Boom. And there are many stories of speakers that were destroyed because of this kick or this bass drum. And that's part of the legend and lore. So I think you agree that if you had the reference of 70s drummers in rock music, these were not the sounds.
Right.
But you can also see how you needed something different to get a new group of musicians or innovative musicians to take things in a direction that we never heard.
Yeah, and in some way, it's almost like a new instrument, right? This new sound that was so iconic and distinctive, and maybe kind of, at least kind of for me, reflecting on technology itself, that replicating the real world, maybe like that's oftentimes we try to create things that's like literally the same as the real world, and versus like, hey, if it actually creates something new and distinctive, that can also be iconic. And I feel like this is, again, one of those areas where I think when the creators, the designers, what it set out to do, actually achieve something completely new that was unexpected or unintended.
100%, 100%. And what's interesting about this, when I look at not only the different sounds, which people didn't hear before, or the ease of programming, we get into this kind of tension between creativity and tools. And, this is something that I think you think a lot about, having worked in bleeding edge stuff in tech. And tell me how you think about this problem. I'm a creative person or an artist or a designer. How do the tools help me versus hinder me? How do the tools help me expand versus contract me?
Yeah, and I'll even bring it to today. If you kind of fast forward and how people create today, I think, especially with Gen AI, this idea of you could synthesize anything you want. I think there's this kind of push to make things like reality versus like it well, not versus. It actually starting to create like everything looks the same. There's this sameness. And to me, that's boring. Like, that's not art. It's this idea of like, wow, you can make it exactly like this style or that style. Or like, you're just creating these derivative of what people think they like versus creating new medium, a new form. I'm optimistic that actually in this new era of generative AI and a lot of discussion about like what's going to happen, will new forms or new mediums kind of be developed and new ways for us to actually create, not just replicating what's existing. Does that make sense? That's the tension I'm seeing right now. So
no, I like that. And so, if we look at how drum machines are evolving, you go from things that are very rigid, like the 808 was very flexible, but at the time, as people moved on, they wanted to have more control. Wasn't there. Beats would have to happen on a time grid precisely. You couldn't nudge things like a human drummer could. You couldn't be behind the beat or whatever by a few milliseconds or whatever. But you now see drum machines that allow you to do that, recording off the grid, drumming by hand, or you can start applying algorithms to the drum track. There are things called Euclidean sequencing. You can do things that are generative. There are many drum machines where you can program the note to fire only if certain conditions are met, and it creates this organic feel where certain things would fire or not. You can create, the early drum machines had a thing called swing, which could move the second and fourth note a little bit, but it would still be rigid. If you wanted to humanize it, you're starting to get that functionality in drum machines. But really what blows everything apart is what's called the digital audio workstation. As we move from the 80s to the 90s, that's where a lot of music was being done, and now it's software.
It's basically on your computer, right? You don't.
Yeah, it's on your computer.
You don't need a machine.
And you can just fire up a bunch of stuff and have it spit out some things for you. And with AI, you can actually do a lot more. And so, I don't know where it's headed, but I think, as we saw with the 808, people who are open to being inspired by it can create, and people who are going to let the machine dictate things to them might have a more difficult time with it, I think.
Yeah. And that's, to me, that's my optimism that people will break the system and find the edges, and that will bend the tool to create something new. And that's where the creativity, that's where it's the edges that's always interesting in music and how things are emerging, or in art or in design, and rather than in the middle. And so I do think there's hope for new forms and new types of music will evolve in this new era. And I feel like 808 was a great lesson of, again, unintended consequences and what you set out to do as a product maker to what creators will do with it. I think that's a really, really great story of, and also I think this idea of creating something new and distinctive, what makes something iconic, and it's not just visual; it could be audio, and I feel like the 808 again is such an iconic product.
Yeah, and one of the kind of, when we wrap it up and we think about what's inspiring about it, just like you said, to me, as somebody who's worked on products like you for a long time, I was giving this talk recently, and somebody came after the talk and said, "You've been only talking about failures." It was a talk about things I worked on. And I said, well, I don't see them as failures. I see each one of these things building on the next thing, and it's about failing forward till you hit success. And I think Roland exemplifies that with the 808, because even though it was a commercial failure as a run for the model, had they not done the 808, I don't think they'd be selling so many boxes right now and so many software plugins and so many other things. Because the 808, I literally have a electronic drum kit that you can set an 808 preset. So it became part of the value proposition of Roland.
It's almost, yeah.
And after that came the 909 and all these other machines, and we get into, contemporary Roland stuff. I think it was a success commercially if you take the long view.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great lesson, that, technology and how pogs get shaped, and there's a kind of the short term, but also the long term view of technology and products, and how they evolve, not because of the original design, but how culture and society adapts it. So
100%. Well, thanks for making the time, Albert. I think this was a fun conversation. And for our listeners, hit us up on the links in the show notes. Just share with us your questions and your thoughts on music, on drum machines, and on products in general, and what you'd like to hear on the show. And again, thank you for tuning in. And Albert, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Thamer.
Okay, everybody, take care.
Take care.
Thank you for listening. The Design Vault is brought to you by hosts Albert Shum and Thamer Abanami, and is produced and edited by Romina Hakim, Tonio Telles, and Poonam Patel, with music by Red Lips Media, brand design by Rafael Poloni. Join the conversation on social media at the Design Vault Podcast on Instagram. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any organizations they represent.